Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Fullmetal Alchemist, Brotherhood. Episode 59, Lost Light. In this episode, Roy is forced to perform the transmutation, which I'm really not thinking that's allowed. Like, I feel like if you check the fine print, it says somewhere that because there is no signature from him, it's just an invalid transmutation. I might be wrong about this, but I am confident enough that I think that he should find some lawyers. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Max for commissioning this episode. Sorry, Max, that this is happening on a different day, but what can you do? We're all at the whims of the internet, pretty much. So, this episode has a lot of little twisty-turnies that were pretty fun, and I wasn't sure how some things, especially with the Gold-Tooth Doctor, were going to go. But I have to say that, as usual, people who are involved with this scheme seem to really overestimate their own value in the whole, grand scheme of the operation. And I find it amazing how utterly confident the Gold-Tooth Doctor is that he is somehow, crucial to the success of this overall experiment. He really thinks. He really does. And, I guess it's because he knows how to do the human transmutation, and maybe he just didn't know that Pride could do what he does. I'm going to be honest, I didn't either. So if Gold-Tooth Guy didn't know, I can't be mad at him for that, or laugh at him too much, because I wasn't aware. Yeah, we do see Pride completely absorb gluttony. I assumed, as I'm sure probably many people did, that was only something he could do because that was a fellow homunculus, not because he can just absorb people. Is that something that we already have seen, that we had evidence of, or am I forgetting something that's kind of crucial? I really am curious. Either way, Gold-Tooth Doctor just winds up in the same position as so many other human beings have along the way, because he thinks that they, need him. Sir, you have been the one that's, promised a lot of things. You need them. I don't know why you thought you were key to all of this somehow. I guess now you know better, and it's a little bit too late for you. But he gets made into quite... amorphous isn't even quite the right word. He gets made into a Lovecraftian-esque sort of monstrosity. It's hideous. And I really have to say that it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'll say about that. But as usual, here I am getting ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning. So we pick up right where we left off with Roy looking at Hawkeye, who has had her throat cut, and she is basically being dangled in front of him as the motivation for him to do the human transmutation. That if he doesn't want her to die, he has to agree. And the end of the last episode, he says, all right, but I was not convinced. And I was really hopeful that he wasn't serious, and it turns out he is saying all right to Hawkeye because he can tell she really does not want him to do it. I was so relieved, y'all. I truly was, because Roy being willing to throw everything aside that they have worked this hard so far for. Is that how I want to say this? It's fine. You get what I mean. I won't even say that it felt necessarily out of character, because I don't know enough about, like, what he's like in a situation with people that he really loves and cares about. I feel like I haven't had enough examples to make a confident judgment there. But I will say that he seems like such a focused person that for him to have been fighting against these guys the whole time and then turn around and do exactly what they're asking him, knowing that he himself is like this final piece that they need and can't do the thing without him, I just didn't see it. And I really do appreciate later that he says to Hawkeye, we've been together so long that I could tell from the way you were looking at me, you were saying, don't do the human transmutation or I will shoot you. And just the idea that they're able to communicate like that because they know each other so well, I do really like. But I also think that he didn't need her looking at him like that for him to not do it. I think that reframing it so as to be like, I knew you didn't want me to, it sounds better than just saying, I would never have done it. Because that sounds like you're saying, I would never have tried to save your life. Which, it's not really fair. Like, that's not actually the same thing, but it does sort of sound that way. You know? Him saying, I would never have thrown away everything that we have worked toward like that. It's just cold-blooded. So having it be, no, we have such a connection that I could tell just by looking at you, you desperately did not want me to do the thing, couches something that could otherwise sound extremely dispassionate to the point of almost being like, are you a person? It just couches it in an affection and like mutual respect that's a lot more palatable. So all that to say, I have no problem with the way they chose to present it for the show. I really don't. But I was thinking that he was likely not going to do it for very different reasons. And I stand by that those reasons were in play. But he also did have her flat out saying, don't do it. And the way that this goes, this is very unexpected because I'll be honest, you guys, I'm not entirely certain. So, all right. I'm going to ask this question later, actually, because it's not exactly at this moment that the thing happens that made me go, wait, what? But if anybody is out there in the chat, please feel free to chime in. I haven't had anybody show up yet, so there may not be any listeners there. But I am encouraging interaction here because there is something that I'm genuinely a little bit confused by. Coming up. At this moment, the good doctor, I don't even know if that's what we want to call him, Goldtooth, he is in the midst of making his, like, little speech about how these guys that he raised from nothing and trained are super grateful to him because of him being a father figure in their lives, training them, showing them how to be the best they could be. And then all of a sudden he vanishes and the philosopher's stone he had been holding hits one of them in the head, and you're like, what? Where did he go? And they look up, and there is the weird saliva chimera hanging from the ceiling holding this guy in spit. Now, y'all know how I feel about this power. It's super gross. It's super useful. I grant you that. But I don't like it. It's unpleasant to look at. It's just creepy. However, this moment of him just like grabbing the doctor as if the doctor were a fly on a lily pad, or a fly and he's a frog on a lily pad, and just like drags him over, is amazing. And the doctor tries to tell him, I'm the only one here who can use alchemy. Without me, you can never save this woman. Don't you understand? And Gerso says, yeah, no, that's not true. And then all of a sudden, here drops May, and she is like actually pretty key in a lot of what happens here. So first she drops in. My immediate reaction is, oh good, she's going to save Hawkeye. But then she's like eyeballing the Philosopher's Stone on the ground, which in this case is actually that little vial. It's liquid. And I'm like, bitch, come on, don't do this. Like, if you want that, fine. But first take care of the dying woman. And thankfully she does. It takes a minute for her to like refocus. It takes hearing Mustang say, stay with me, don't die on me, like, before she looks up and goes, oh, okay, right, Hawkeye comes first. But there's a minute there where I was like, is she just going to try and take this and bounce? Because I will never forgive her for that ever. So one of the dudes like comes up behind one of the, not like the guy Mira, but one of the, I'm not really sure what to call them, the like original soldiers, the test subjects, I suppose, almost gets Roy in the back. And Darius, I think is the name of the one that looks kind of ape-like, saves him. There's a lot of bouncing around of this Philosopher's Stone in the midst of that before Mei Chang is like, okay, I gotta do what I gotta do. And she goes over and she helps with Hawkeye stopping the bleeding, but is like, she definitely still needs an actual doctor, though. Like, I have managed to keep her from death, but what I did is by no means just saving her by itself. So at this point, they're all happy. Hawkeye has been saved. There's a real sense of, we did it, gang. And then all of a sudden, May is like, okay, let me go grab the Philosopher's Stone. And she looks over and starts to walk toward it. And then we hear other footsteps. And it's the Führer. I will tell you what. Listener, the Führer keeps being so menacing. And I am not used to being afraid of a man in a mustache like this. That is not to say that they're not out there. Very intimidating characters in mustaches. But a lot of the time, mustaches are sort of meant to like be shorthand for a person being kind of like weak in media. Like, for example, taking Walter White. Walter White starts out with a really like intense mustache, and over the course of the show changes it to a goatee. And that was a conscious choice by the showrunners to imply his like growth as not necessarily a better person, but certainly having sheer like strength and self-confidence and assuredness. So anytime you can pull off a character that is truly scary and they have a mustache, I'm just impressed. That's not like, you know, the only times I've ever seen it where it's a character that has been an effective villain are people who are sort of like creeps and perverts a little bit too. And he has had one eye essentially like put out. So there's part of his face that's like kind of caving in where the eye was supposed to have been. Scarring, bleeding. He's still got his sword. But overall, the man is not in great shape. And later on, somebody says, I don't think we could take him even in the state he's in. And I believed that they were correct. That is not an easy thing to pull off either. Having a man be injured and facing a room of 6-7 people who all just like took a couple of pretty powerful dudes out and still being like, yeah, I don't know, man. I think you guys probably would lose also. But it just goes to show you how much of an impression seeing Bradley take down a fucking tank by himself made on me. And then we get a little bit of a flashback and we see what happened with him falling into the moat. there's like an open, sort of broken grate, and he swims to that, and it like brings him out in a sewer sort of area under the building. And again, nobody ever thought he was dead. Like, I was certain that this had not killed him. But the fact that he manages to find them specifically, I was like, truly, maybe y'all should have kept your voices down more. I don't know. I don't know how he found them, but it's just unfair. And he says to Roy, basically, I thought you were going to be a little bitch and do the fucking transmutation to save her. And Roy is like, I may have at one point, but not that person anymore. And Wrath is like, I fucking cannot stand that about y'all. I keep thinking, I know what you're going to do. I know that you're never going to learn your lesson. I know that you're always going to make the same predictable mistakes. And then you do some real growth. And all of a sudden, every prediction that I had about you just flies out the window. And honestly, there is something about that I find really delightful. See, the thing is, for me, I do think that overall, like, as a species, humans don't tend to learn in a lot of ways. Like, that's not to say that we haven't come a long way from who we used to be as a species, but we do display a depressingly similar series of patterns over and over again. But on a smaller scale, I believe that individuals can learn and grow for sure. It's just harder, and it's certainly going to be less predictable. But I just enjoy Wrath because, that's his name. His name is Wrath. That's his whole thing. And they were like, what are we going to make him mad about? And they decided to have him be mad about the fact that human beings are better than he expects. So they're kind of doing the same thing as envy here, where envy is, and again, this is sort of, envy is allegedly jealous of the fact that humans can like forgive and move on. But there is somebody who was in the last episode recording, and forgive me, I can't remember who it was now, who was saying that they felt like envy's representation of the envy regarding human beings wasn't really expressed super well within the dialogue. And I definitely agree with that. But if we're going to just take it as premise rather than looking at the actual like effectiveness of that portrayal, I think it makes sense that they're going to just kind of do the same thing with Wrath. And I don't remember if there's been any similar conversation with Pride. I feel like there was when he was locked in that onion. I was going to say the turnip, but it's really an onion. But I don't recall. Anyway, so at this point, May kind of looks down and says their leader is down there. And Goldtooth who is still, by the way, like caught up, is yelling, no, I won't let you interfere with him. And this was, okay, so everybody is, you know what, I keep doing this. I keep wanting to jump to the end of this to talk about the thing that I'm confused by, but I have to hold off because I want to kind of dissect the way that scene goes step by step. So, for the moment, Gerso is telling the doc, forget it, you're not going anywhere. And then all of a sudden, May jumps out of the way. There's a gout of blood pouring down from the ceiling. And it turns out Pride is here. And yes, he did free Goldtooth for the moment. But it turns out he has his own thing that he's going to do. And Goldtooth entirely believes this means like, oh, good, you saved me. Thank you. Now I am safe. And he is mistaken. I have to say, too, how great Pride's overall entrance is. I know how often we have seen this dude, that it shouldn't have the same effect, but it does. he basically is carried physically to the ground on the shadow. And this was a question that I had a little while back, if y'all remember, whether or not the shadows themselves were Pride. Whether or not, if the shadows could move somewhere, that meant that Pride was moving somewhere. In other words, anywhere that the shadows could go, could Pride also go? I couldn't tell. And it still looks like they're a separate thing from Pride, like they're part of him, but not really. Like, he has control over them, but they don't come from within. So he isn't the shadows. It's just something that he can manipulate in the same way that, like, in the same way that alchemy can manipulate an existing, like, object or material. Which is really fascinating, actually, now that I think about it, because I'm like, does that mean that using alchemy like a regular human could ever learn to control shadow? That's so wild, but it never really occurred to me that maybe somebody else could figure out how to do this. But anyway, so yeah, he uses like the shadow to sort of make almost a ladder is too strong a word. It's more like he just makes a sort of little platform that he stands and leans on, and it carries him down. It's just a pretty great entrance. That's all I'm saying. So Roy hands over Hawkeye and starts to be like, you look after her now. And as he does this, he uses the alchemy from one of the gloves to cast flame at Bradley, who is in the midst of attacking him. And I had totally missed the fact, and this is so dumb because I know that we have seen it, but I had missed the fact that Roy has two gloves on. Because, you know, we saw the one glove get sliced by one of Goldtooth's little henchmen. So I was sort of like, oh shit, he doesn't have a way to use alchemy at all anymore. I see that he has a second glove, and I'm like, great. I was wrong. I forgot the other hand. Perfect. And an instant later, the Fuhrer is on top of him, driving his blades right through both of Roy's palms and through the gloves, which I have to assume that means that these gloves are now both completely moot. That's it. And this is when Goldtooth, who is watching the attack, stands up and says with all of the smugness in the world, "Good job, Bradley. That is the man that I raised you to be." And an instant later, he gets impaled through the middle by a blade of shadow. And I have got to tell you guys, I wanted to cheer. I wanted to clap and cheer because I already figured that this dude, it wasn't going to go the way he planned, but I really thought it would take longer for him to get any sort of comeuppance. I was sure he was going to be around like right until the end. And I didn't have a problem with that or anything, but it's just like I really assumed that I knew how this was going to go for him. And instead, he gets impaled. I love that Pride is standing next to him, doing this to him and not even looking at him. There is no connection between the expression on Pride's face and what is happening to the Doctor right now. So they have him pinned to the ground, Roy. And on the floor of this place, Pride is sort of making the transmutation circle out of shadow around Roy, which apparently is enough. It doesn't need to be actually drawn. The shadow is plenty. And Bradley is like, "You're going to do it. You're our fifth one." And Roy says, "What are you talking about? I'm not doing the transmutation circle. You can't make me." And he's like, "Oh, no, yeah, we can actually." Which I really just don't think is true. I think that the fact that Roy didn't do this voluntarily means that something isn't going to work out right. I think it's going to wind up being a consequence they didn't foresee, because they didn't take into account whether a person's will was more important than the actual result. He didn't intend to do the transmutation circle. He had no part in making the circle or any of this. So I'm just going to place a bet right now that it doesn't go the way the homunculi believe it's going to. And part of me wants to be like, wouldn't they know? Wouldn't they be prepared for the eventuality that somebody being unwilling might change the outcome of things? But I don't really have any idea. We know, of course, that the homunculi have been using these circles over and over again because they're making the Philosopher's Stones, right? But have they ever had somebody be unwilling before? Maybe there's just no precedent for this at all, which is sort of fascinating to me, because they were operating, I guess, under the assumption that absolutely everybody who participated in this with them, beginning to the very end, was going to be 100% willing, which is kind of surprising to me, because they never had 5 good options for their sacrifices to begin with. So they've been putting all of their eggs into the "if we make them, it will still count" basket, and that doesn't feel like great planning to me. You should test out doing this against somebody's will to see what happens first. And again, I may be wrong, and it may work just the same exact way, and I don't know what I'm talking about, in which case my feelings on them needing to have prepared a little bit better are moot. But I just have my suspicions, so we'll see. Pride is talking to Roy and says, "I was hoping we wouldn't have to resort to this, but we have no other choice." And Bradley says, "Whether you like it or not, we're going to make you open the portal, so you better prepare yourself. It doesn't matter if you don't want to. Pride has just assimilated an alchemist who possesses knowledge of human transmutation." And as he says this, the camera focuses on Goldtooth's face, which is completely wrapped in shadow except for his crazy eyes. And he looks extremely alarmed. He hadn't realized he was being absorbed. So now he knows, and he realizes he's not getting away, and there's absolutely nothing he can do. So anyway, Bradley says he has the necessary formula, and he's going to help us do this. And Pride says, "All right, I've got him. Wrath, you can move on out." And he gets up and leaves, but the shadows are continuing to hold Roy in place. And when Bradley walks away, he says, "I wonder what will be taken from you, Mustang." And then the circle activates. And there's this huge flash of light. Roy disappears, and Bradley has to reassure everyone, "Oh, he's not dead. He's with Father now, and they're gonna figure this all out together." But this horrible lump hits the floor, and it is Goldtooth Doctor. I don't even know what to say about it, except that it's hideous. And I guess eventually, a moment from now, he's going to die. I am assuming that this sort of twitching wreck that we see is the same level of really not conscious that the figure they thought was their mother and have since learned isn't, the figure that Izumi thought was her baby isn't. I am figuring that he is just eventually going to die, right? This is the twitching of the last moments of life that remained to him. I don't know. Anyway, so this is when Wrath says, "I can't vouch for his well-being, but I know that he isn't dead yet. And then he looks around and says, so, do you guys want to come at me one by one? Or do you want to all come at me at once? And Gerso is like, all right, there is some spot right beneath the hole in the ceiling. May felt something directly below us. The doctor guy said he wouldn't let us interfere. So I'm guessing Bradley doesn't want us to go down there either. And Scar is like, oh, okay, so if that's the center, then let's go. And he engages with Bradley using alchemy, and the fight begins. We cut then to Roy in that void, the white void, with the creepy, like, wide-toothed, grinned white creature. And the gates opening. And at this point, Roy still has his eyesight, in a manner of speaking, because he is reacting to the sights of everything around him. In the room with Ed and Izumi and I really think I'm getting her name wrong, but I always feel that way. And Father, he sort of drops out of, there's a portal that forms in the ceiling, and a weirdly biological looking sort of opening squeezes him out of it like a giant sphincter. It's truly awful. And he drops to the floor. And then Pride appears and says, all right, I got you the fifth one. And Father says, I would love to be able to say that they're all here. But Alphonse has still not arrived. And this is when we get Ed talking to Mustang. And Mustang saying, because Al says something like, you haven't lost anything. If you came through the portal, what have you lost? And Roy responds, I don't know how you can tell anything in this darkness. And I was like, oh, that's fucked up. Like, the idea of losing a limb, it's horrifying, but they do have automail. Like, there's a lot they can do now. And losing his sight, I'm really not sure if there's anything in this universe that would be able to undo something like that, short of, the Philosopher's Stone. But yeah, he's wandering around thinking that it's like completely dark in here. And this is when we get Father, who begins to like, first Pride is basically like, well, Roy, that's what you get. Your little power has been a mighty huge pain in the ass for us. And he says, I think it's fair to say you've had this coming. Which is amazing. I think it's fair to say. Is it? Or do you just feel that way? Whatever. As he says this, by the way, a bit of Pride like flakes off and like crumbles to dust. And he notices and like puts his hand over it. If he had been completely ignoring it, I might not consider it anything to worry about. But the fact that he seems to almost be trying to like hold himself together makes me think Pride is on the edge of being completely, I don't know if destroyed, but like he's about to take a pretty serious injury, I have to assume. So Ed begins to quiz Roy on whether or not he did the human transmutation. And Roy is like, no. And I love that he says, do you think I would willingly do such a thing? Which is amazing because he's like surrounded by people who have done it. And there's just a real sense of judgment there, even though, yeah, I think he has the right to be judgy about it. I'm not mad. But it did feel kind of like, do you think I would be so fucking stupid in front of several other people who were indeed so fucking stupid? So Pride tells Ed we had to force him. And now his meddling and his troublesome flame alchemy will be no further problem for us. And Father says the truth can be such a cruel thing. And talks about Ed and Al wanting to see their mom. And then, she's just like gone forever. And one of them is reduced to a suit of armor that feels nothing. And then Izumi, the woman who sought to bring back her only baby, was given a body that could no longer bear children. The man who looked to change his nation had his eyesight taken from him, and now he can no longer see its future. Humans who would dare to play God must pay a steep price. That is the way of the universe, the natural order imposed by the very thing you claim to worship. That is the truth. And Ed yells, "I don't think so." Which was it was one of those moments where I was like, okay, Ed, 100% agree. Let's hear your theory here. But also the way that it's like edited, he says, "I don't think so." And then there's a cut. And I'm imagining when this like initially aired, that was probably a spot where they had an ad break. And Ed saying, "I don't think so." Cut to commercial. When it comes back, I would be sort of expecting him to launch an attack or do something pretty dramatic. And instead, we just get him saying, if he'd done it of his own volition like we did, that would be one thing. So there's not really a, action moment here. It feels as being set up. Instead, it's just Ed being like, he didn't voluntarily do this. He didn't have arrogance. He didn't try to play God. He was forced to do a thing. And I'm not going to accept that he deserves what happened to him, because none of that was his choice. And I thought that was I thought that maybe Father would seem a little bit more worried. Father basically grins at Ed in a way that says to me, "Oh, you think so, huh?" He's extremely confident it's not working out the way Ed thinks it will. But I'm over here it can't. The intent has to match. Right? I don't know. I'm just sort of thinking that there's a justice inherent to things. And I'm doing that because I still have this idealism in me in a lot of ways. And maybe there isn't. Maybe there just isn't. And it is going to count in just exactly the same way. So we cut back to the room where Bradley is with the rest of the gang, and they have just dropped down through the floor. And it's still Scar fighting Bradley. He's basically, I think, just trying to distract him so that the rest of them can go and fuck with Father. But I will say that watching Scar fight Bradley is delightful. The two of them are such badasses. And Scar is a particular kind that it's just very apt to me for him to go up against the Fuhrer. I was sort of picturing a fight between Ed and the Fuhrer, Roy and the Fuhrer, that those would be the ones that were the big significant moments. And I kind of left Scar out of everything, which isn't really fair to him because he is part of the community that actually suffered directly what the Fuhrer did. And both of them I am hoping will clash as part of the big fight. Assuming Wrath is even still there, or that Scar is, I really, just for the record, I really want Scar to make it. If he dies in the attempt to overthrow the homunculi and stop them, I'm not going to be mad about it because it feels like what he has been working for his entire life is to like stop this horrific thing that is going to be continually perpetrated and had already been, he was a victim of it initially. But I do feel like Scar has just been in the midst of this awful war, or fighting people who were part of this awful war for such a long time, that I would personally like him to make it through this whole thing and be able to like continue to live as a normal person who isn't in the middle of a massive war after this is over and done with. And he may not get that. And maybe he doesn't really even want that. If I asked him, maybe being like a normal person who just farms, or I don't know, maybe that doesn't have any appeal for him. But I want for him to be able to experience some kind of real peace in his life before he dies. And I'm just saying, I'm rooting for him to make it through. So this is when Bradley asks Scar, what's your real name anyway? And Scar says, I don't have a real name. I left it. And Bradley is like, it's funny. I don't know my real name either. So I guess we're just going to be two dudes who are nameless going head to head. I guess that's kind of poetic. And it cuts from each of their faces back and forth, back and forth. It is almost comical how many times it does this, and it begins to speed up. And then clash, explosion of light. And all of a sudden, we see May dropping through the ceiling into the same room as Pride and Father and Ed and Al. I don't understand how they could get here. Every time that they were like, oh, he said that we're right above them. Whatever is happening is directly below us. I thought what was happening directly below them was going to turn out to be some other kind of circle that had been cast to bring them into Father's realm. I did not realize that essentially the circle that was cast earlier to cause them all to like dissipate and reappear just brought them to another room on this physical plane in the same building. I didn't get that at all. So they are in a spot where people who weren't grabbed up by this circle, I guess, that Goldtooth cast, they can just walk in the middle of whatever it is that they're planning to do, which is so much less dignified. I thought all the people in question had been gathered and pulled through the portal again. And it looks like they have, from the way it's animated, I mean, Ed being like slowly dissembled, all the shadow hands pulling him apart. He's being pulled through and he sees like the portal doors. We have Roy seeing the portal doors opening. It all feels like they're being pulled into an entirely different dimension. And then they are just right here, basically like in the sub-basement. How is that the thing? I don't know if that's supposed to be part of like the joke, or if I just deeply misunderstood what was happening with them. I really didn't. I mean, the thing is, Al is still in the portal because we see him have a conversation with himself in a minute. So they definitely did pass through it, but then got brought back? Is that right? It's just really confusing to me. And I'm assuming they got brought through and then like brought back because whatever seasoning you need, isn't in our world. The seasoning that you need to be a sacrifice is floating around in the air in the portal. So they get dragged through it so that they're seasoned properly. And then they're prepared to be spitted and roasted and used as sacrifices. So I'm not thinking that, like, you know, May and company showing up physically means that they can be used as interchangeable with the others. I don't think that. It's simply the fact that these guys are still physically present at all that I found genuinely startling. I just wanted to register with you all my complete startlement that dropping through the floor into the next section of rooms dropped them in the same room that everybody's in. I thought they were going to be dropped next to something that could make a portal for them to go and pursue the rest of their friends into, like, the nether region. And I didn't think that they were just gonna drop into the same room. It was truly like I had a moment of, wait, hold on. And I finally stopped and realized I have this upside down. Meanwhile, Father is like, I can't believe that you broke a hole in my fucking ceiling. That is really rude. And I love May. She looks at him and says, there's no room for doubt. I can feel the chi coming off you. You're the one that's responsible for everything. And she says it like she's really cracked the code. And I was like, May, babe, yeah, clearly. Everybody here knows that already, babe. But, okay. So she looks over at this point, and Al is, you know, his whole suit of armor is on the ground. And she's saying, please wake up, Alphonse. You have to. And then we cut back over to Alphonse in the portal in this, like, white nothingness. And his body is sitting directly across from him. And I had a real moment of just like, oh, shit. You know, looking at it like, I really didn't think this would happen so soon. And my next thought was, well, that's cool. He can get his body back and he can fight the remainder of all these battles that are probably coming up in his own body. Because I didn't think about the practicality of the body's, like, health on its own. Basically, the conclusion that Al comes to, because he walks up, his body says, I've been waiting a long time. It's a real sort of sad moment. And holds his hand up, and they're going to touch. And I guess that in order for the body to reabsorb the soul, they'd have to, like, touch fingers and mean it. Because it's not just touching. Al grabs his body by the wrist, and nothing happens. So I was surprised by that, like, touching was something he could still do and not risk connection against his will, you know? But apparently it has to be something that they both are, like, agreeing to as they touch. And he grabs him and says, you are so thin you can barely stand up. You are literally skin and bones. That's all there is. I can't fight in that body. And I was suddenly going, oh shit, because, like, I had a sort of mental image of Al, his body taking his soul back into it, and his body fleshing out that he was so thin and withered looking as a result of the soul being separated. And that if the body got the nourishment of the soul's presence, the body would suddenly, like, gain weight, become healthy. But that's not really the way that it worked for him to lose this weight in the first place. The way it's supposedly been happening is that his body is sort of connected to Ed's. And so some of Ed's life force that would, you know, help him to grow taller, for example, has been being siphoned off in order to keep this body alive in the in-between place. And if that is what's keeping the body alive, then clearly this is like a practical body that could die if it did not have a connection. Like, I don't know if it's the fact that they're brothers or if it's the fact that they did the transmutation together at the same time at the circle. If another person did this with Ed and they weren't related, maybe it would still have worked. But I am guessing most people who do human transmutation don't do it with a partner the way they did. So there wouldn't be an opportunity for either of them to sacrifice on behalf of the other. And thus, this is probably like one of the first times that we have, like, in this universe, I'm saying, that anybody would have gotten to see the result of two people, one sacrificing on behalf of the other to, like, keep the other alive, and how that would even work. It doesn't seem like a precedented thing. So anyway, all this to say, when Al said, "I can't fight in this body," I was like, oh my God. If that's how it works, then no, he cannot fight in this body. Well, then what does that mean? And essentially, he has to, like, continue through the portal, like through the doors that open, back to the room with everybody else, and leave his body behind after desperately searching for it all this time, which was rough. Like, that is a really brutal choice to have to make. And to his credit, I thought his body was gonna kind of be like, well, I really hope you are able to come back, but I don't know if we're gonna get this chance again, and this might be the end of the line for me after all. But instead, his body says how proud he is. And essentially is just like, that's a damn good soul. And I am lucky to be connected to it at all, you know? I really liked that. I like the body having its own, it's like a sort of an odd thing for it to be able to make judgment calls and have value systems if the soul is entirely separate from it, which I think indicates that it's not entirely separate. But I like the idea that even though the body wants to be rejoined with the soul and is like, yeah, no, let's do this, it still understands, like, the priorities going on and is thinking, yeah, you're doing the right thing and this totally sucks for me right now, but, you know, I'll get over it and we got to do what we got to do. So anyway, all that to say that Al goes back through and leaves his body behind. It's this awful, like, huge moment for him. And as he goes through, we see him, like, sitting up in the weird cavern that everybody's waiting for him in. And Father then says, all right, now you're all here. Let's go, kids. And everybody in the room is prepped to fight against Father. Like, they're standing there in position as if they are about to duel with him physically right now. Except for Roy, because poor Roy can't see. So I'm not really sure what he could do, especially since both of his, like, gloves have been cut. I don't know that there's anything that he could do, even if he had his sight, with alchemy at least, you know? So that is how the episode ends, is like we get to see all of them getting ready to go up against Father and the body saying, "My Alphonse," and then cut to credits. And that is it. And I still don't know what it is the homunculi are trying to do. I still don't know anything about, like, I even had the location they were all in wrong for like 2 episodes in a row. So I clearly just don't know jack shit. I've been trying to sort of think of predictions. I have no fucking idea what's even happening 5 minutes from when I'm watching. I can't make any sort of prediction. It is beyond me at the moment. I am very curious overall about how like they're all acting like they're going to be able to just go hand to hand with Father. I don't know that that's going to work. Like, Father doesn't have his, like, flesh bag anymore. Can they fight him? Is that how that would even work? I think Pride has established pretty convincingly he could beat them all. If there's a light source, that's all there is to it. Pride is winning. However, I'm also not going to say, oh, well, just sit back and accept the fact that you're likely not going to be able to make a difference here and let things happen to you. I'm not saying that, but it's just interesting how even now they're all responding to Father as if he is like a physical person who is going to come at them and try and chain them up, or I don't even know what they're thinking he's going to do. I am not sure they know what they think he's going to do either. It's just a general sense of, well, it's not going to be good, so I think we can relax and leave it at that. And the fact that Pride is still here, but Wrath isn't, and like Scar didn't come down. I actually don't remember seeing the Chimera down there either. I feel like it was just May that dropped, but maybe the Chimera came after and I missed it. But I don't know if Pride's presence is absolutely necessary to this going off. We know that he's like the OG, or at least the oldest G out of everybody other than Father. So it may simply be that he and Father are so deeply linked that in order for Father to be whole, Pride does have to be there. But the fact that Wrath isn't here yet, I'm not really certain the function Wrath would serve, because I don't know if they need to be part of the overall ritual or I genuinely don't know. Wrath is an outlier. I said, I think last episode, or maybe the episode before, about how Wrath didn't age, and somebody in the chat, I saw it right after I clicked end, said, well, he does age though, because he's not made from scratch. He was a person, and there's photos of him made, and I was like, oh right, I completely forgot. I keep thinking of him as a regular homunculus, and he's not. So I am not sure if the kind of thing Pride would need to be present for is the kind of thing that Wrath would be helpful with, because I don't think they're really made out of the same sort of material. But I just don't have a great grasp on what all Wrath can do and can't do anyway. So, I'm just sort of guessing here. But I know that they don't need Scar. So whether or not Scar comes down is probably sort of irrelevant to the overall thing. I'm just very curious about Wrath. And I'm also curious about what Wrath knows about what they're working toward. Because Wrath strikes me as somebody who doesn't it's interesting because he is obviously somebody who has strong leadership qualities. He is somebody who handles situations and is extremely proactive, but I don't know how he is in response to Father, and I'm sort of assuming Wrath just takes orders and doesn't ask questions, because he has a really strict sense of hierarchy and is like, well, it's not my place to ask questions. He told me to do a thing. This is Father. I'm doing the thing. And I'm just wondering if Wrath actually knows anything about what's coming in detail, or if he's just been given basic vague orders and is carrying out those orders because that's his job and that's what he does. Because, if there's anything that's been thematic so far, it's every human being that has been involved with the project has dramatically overestimated their own importance to the project. And despite Wrath being who he is, also he's part human. So maybe he's just going to be another one in the mix of humans who really overplayed their hand a little bit. I don't know. But anyway, all right, it's time to wrap. Thank you guys again so much for listening. And thank you, Max, for commissioning this. Again, I'm sorry I had to change the date, but not my fault. I hope that you're all enjoying everything. And I can't believe how few episodes we've got left, guys. 5 left. Wow. All right, until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.